if I'm not answering your question and you really, really want me to make sure that I'm answering your question, kind of do the raise your hand and it'll kind of give me a beep boop so that I know that somebody's in there trying to get something answered. All right. So we are going to talk about memory. Now, for those of you who saw Cats, this joke is hitting because that was one of the songs. Memory, like the corner. No, you didn't see Cats, and I don't blame you. Apparently, it sucked. Not worth seeing. But maybe you did because maybe you're a closet, theater geek. I don't know. Who knows? I certainly don't. So let's start talking about memory. What is the job of memory? Well, there are 3 jobs of memory. The first one is to encode. When we talk about encoding things, we're talking about taking the sensory information that our brain is absorbing at all times when we are awake and putting it into our brain to be remembered or thought of later. Okay. The second job is to store that information for a later date. If we did not store that information, then memory would be useless because we could encode and we could retrieve, but what are we retrieving? It's gone. The last job is to retrieve that information. Now, there's lots of different analogies and metaphors for what memory is like, and we'll go over a couple of those today. But basically, this is what your memory does, the 3 things. It encodes things so that it can be retrieved later. It stores things for anywhere between a few moments to the rest of your life. And then it can retrieve that information for future reference so that it can go, hey, that's like this, or hey, I remember that, or whatever. That's what the main job of memory is. Now, to encode information into your brain, you have to transform the information that you are absorbing through your senses so that your nervous system can process it. And there's a couple of different ways that you can encode the information. The first is through acoustic encoding, and that's what you are hearing. Okay, if you are a person who can hear something and remember it, then you have a strong acoustic encoding device in your memory. Okay, and that's perfectly natural and normal. Some people have stronger acoustic, some people have stronger visual, whatever. But if you can hear it and remember it and spit it back out again at a later date, you have a strong acoustic encoding. Another type of encoding is visual, and of course that has to do with being able to see it. Okay, the reason why I have slides like this is because not only are you hearing me talk about this, but you're also seeing what I'm talking about so that you can create some kind of visual association with what I'm talking about. Okay, if you can think about the encoding process of filling your brain like a gas tank, then this will help you to remember that into the future. So when I ask you, what is encoding? Oh, that's where you fill your brain's gas tank. I remember that cartoon with the gauge on the guy's head. That is a visual encoding. If you need to write something down in order to remember it, then you have a stronger visual encoding than you do acoustic encoding. Okay. If I hear something, I will generally remember it. But if I write it down, I will remember it. Okay, I have a much stronger visual encoding process than I do acoustic, but my acoustic encoding will just put in the most random things. But we'll talk about that later. The last type of encoding that your brain can do to ensure that you remember things is semantic encoding. And this requires your brain to actually process the information. For example, if you want to remember the names of the 5 Great Lakes, you might use a mnemonic device with which to encode that information so that you can pull that information out of your brain later. Now, why would you need to remember the name of the 5 Great Lakes? I don't know. Maybe you're visiting Michigan and you want to make sure that you don't look like a complete idiot when they start asking you about what's your favorite Great Lake. Oh, I like the Great Salt Lake. It's not one of the Great Lakes. Okay, there are 5 Great Lakes: Huron, Erie, Ontario, Michigan, Superior. Yes, those are the 5 Great Lakes. Now, what is a semantic way of encoding that information so that you can remember it? You remember HOMES, the word homes. Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior, the 5 Great Lakes. It is a way of processing the information so it's easier to remember. If you've ever remembered doing, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, so that you can remember the order of operations. That was semantic encoding. SOHCAHTOA, for those of you who are in geometry doing sine, cosine, and tangent, okay? That is a semantic way of encoding the information. Instead of just looking at it and going, I remember it, you actually process the information and then remember it. Now, that's how I remember most of my math classes, because as soon as I got out of my math classes, I immediately forgot everything about my math classes. But we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. Okay. Now, storage is the process through which we keep that information locked in our brain over a period of time. Again, it could be a few moments of storage, or it could last until the very day that you die. Okay, there is no limit to how long a piece of information will stay stuck in your brain. Okay, and also there's no limit on how much information your brain can absorb and acquire over a period of time. So there is no set amount of, this is as much as you can remember. That's all it ever is, and all it ever will be. Okay, it's not as if you learn something new, you're going to forget something old. Okay, you remember that year that I read the encyclopedia and I forgot how to drive? That was a weird year. Okay, that's not how your brain works. That's not how your memory works. Okay, your brain is not a filing cabinet. It is a series of endless filing cabinets that get stuffed with information, whether it be useful or not. But we'll talk about how the useful stuff kind of gets rid of, how you get rid of that. Okay. The last thing that you have to do is to retrieve that information. If you encode it and you store it and you can't retrieve it, then what's the good of the memory? There really isn't one. So the retrieval process is the steps through which we use to obtain that information that is locked away in those filing cabinets in the back of our brains. Now, for some people, retrieval is very simple, a very easy process. And there are other people who have trouble even opening the door of the filing cabinet. We all have those moments where you're standing there and you're like, what am I here? What am I doing in here? What do I need in here? I don't know. And then you walk away, and then you walk past what you were supposed to be getting, and you're like, oh yeah, and you walk back. Okay, that is your brain retrieving that information through the use of retrieval cues. Okay, and we'll talk about those as well. Now, there are people out there who have a very, very strong retrieval process. These are people who participate in the memory championships. And yes, there are such a thing as memory championships. Basically, what they do is they get memory masters from around the world into a single place, and then they have a contest to see who can remember the most information. Now, I will post a video from YouTube about these memory championships after we're done here today. It's a very interesting video. I encourage you to watch it at your leisure to just kind of see what the world of memory championships looks like. But basically, these people have a very, very specific retrieval process. And that's what another video that I'm going to give to you is what is that process and what does that process look like? And usually what it is through what we call context-dependent memory effect. Okay. Context-dependent memory effect is a long phrase which basically means you remember more when you put your memory back into the context with which you encoded the messages. Now, normally we would be saying this, or I would be saying this to you in my classroom, in a darkened classroom, and I can point to things on the wall where you're sitting or whatever and say, if I were to take you out of this room and give you a test on this, you will probably do worse on the test than you did if you were sitting in here. Because in sitting here, you could look around, and if you see the clock on the wall, you're like, oh yeah, I remember when we talked about the content-dependent memory effect. Oh yeah, that's right, I remember that. And now you're going to get another question correct. Whereas if we go to the library and take the test there, you might completely forget about that because suddenly you're not where you were when you encoded it. This is also why sometimes when police officers are doing an investigation and they want you to try to remember more information, that they take you back to the scene of the crime. Do you remember more information now? Oh yeah, I remember this and I remember this. Okay, it's all about the context-dependent memory effect. Now, these memory champions create their own context-dependent memory effect, and it's a little bit of a trick to remember all of these different things. Now, what kinds of things can you remember? Well, the example in the video that I'm going to post is a guy who memorizes, I think it was the first 100 digits of pi, okay? For me, 3.14159. Yeah, that's all I got. He can remember pi all the way out to, I think it was 100 digits. Okay, so that's a lot of pi. Okay, and for those of you who are thinking, you're remembering pi? No, not the desserts, the irrational number of the circumference of a circle, 3.1415936, yada, yada, yada. It goes on infinitely. There is no pattern. It doesn't ever stop. Pi just keeps going. Why? Reasons. Anyway, the fact of the matter is that if you can memorize a series of numbers that are no pattern, just nonsense numbers that have no real meaning to you, you can remember almost anything. So the example is going to be pi. Another example I don't know if we're going to be able to do a demonstration of next week. But maybe we'll be able to do a little demonstration of some nonsense syllables, basically 3-letter syllables. How much can you remember of them, type of a thing. There's all kinds of different things, and these memory champions can easily remember all of them because of their retrieval mechanisms that they have created. In addition to the 3 jobs of memory, your memory has 3 stages. The first stage is your sensory memory. And your sensory memory is basically everything that is being absorbed by your senses at this moment in time. How cold or hot it is, how painful this is, whatever it is that you're sitting on. Maybe you need to, get up and move around for a second. The taste that's in your mouth right now, the smell of your house or wherever it is that you are right now, the sounds of my voice, along with whatever else is going on, the ticking of clocks or whatever, the things that you are seeing, all of your sensory input, your external stimuli that your senses are absorbing, that gets put into your sensory memory. And we'll talk more about that in just a second. Then that gets put into your short-term memory, anything that is paid attention to in the slightest, which hopefully right now is what this slide says and the words that are coming out of my mouth. Those get put into your short-term memory. The more that you go over those things in your short-term memory, the larger the chances are that it gets encoded into your long-term memory for long-term storage. Again, from right now, possibly until the day you die, which will hopefully be many, many decades from right this moment. Okay? But on your deathbed, you might suddenly go, I remember the stages of memory. Damn, Mr. Mac. And then you just die. That's probably what's going to happen. I'm just saying. Okay? You're going to remember the stages of memory and then out like a light, never to be seen or heard from again. Just kidding. You're going to come back as a ghost. We all know that. Oh, God. This is the most I've stood up in 3 weeks, and I am really getting tired, and I don't want to sit down because if I sit down, I'm not getting back up again, and I've got to make it to the bed so that I can nap. I feel like I'm in my 70s, honestly. Anyway, so sensory memory leads to short-term memory, which leads to long-term memory. Okay. So starting off with your sensory memory, what exactly is it? Well, the best analogy that I can think of is I want you to think of your sensory memory as like a 5-gallon bucket from Home Depot. Okay, one of those orange buckets. We've all seen them. Okay, that is your sensory memory. And from the moment you wake up, your senses are filling that bucket with water and diamonds. And the diamonds and the water are coming out of a fire hose. So I want you to imagine above the bucket, just above it, not very far, but just right above the bucket, is a huge fire hose shooting water and diamonds into the bucket. Now, that bucket is being filled 5 times a second every second. So it's just gushing water all over the place. And your brain has to pick out the information that's important. Now, what's important? The diamonds. The diamonds are important. But some of them are just glass. So you have to make sure that you're getting the actual diamond and not just pieces of glass. So you can't just hold your hands underneath the fire hose and go, okay, let her rip, and you're going to get all the stuff. You're not. You're going to get all cut up, and it's going to hurt. So you got to reach into that bucket and pull out the diamonds, the information that you're trying to learn. Okay? It holds on to memories for a very short amount of time, 30 seconds at the most. If you've ever been in that situation where you're not really listening to your mom or your dad, and they come in and they tell you to do something, and they're like, you're not even listening to me. What did I just say? And then you can repeat it back to them. You weren't actually paying any attention, because what's going to happen is as soon as they leave the room, you're going to forget everything that they just said. But for that 30 seconds when they ask you, what did I just say? You said this, and you can repeat it back to them exactly. Like, yeah, well, okay, you were listening. And then they leave, and then they come back, and they're like, wait, why didn't you do it? Do what? I told you to do it. No, you didn't. And you go in, that's because it was in your sensory memory. It never made it to your short-term memory. Because you got to actually pull that diamond out and go, ooh, that goes over here in short-term memory. I'm going to think about that for the next couple of seconds. It is the ability for you to pull out information from that gushing fire hose of raw information that is coming at you. Okay? It's that ability to be able to pull that little piece of information out that you need so that the rest of the information can be forgotten. Because do you really need to know what it smells like right now? No, you really don't. So that information can go away. Nobody's going to sit there and go, and at 11:13, it smelled like this in the house. And then at 11:14, it smelled like this. Nobody remembers that. Nobody. Because it's useless. Unless, of course, it smells really bad, and then you're going to remember that. But that's something, that's the diamond that you're pulling out. Woo, that one smells bad. I'm going to remember that one for later. Okay? And there are a couple of different types of sensory memory that tend to stick out. The first is iconic memory. Iconic is visual memory. Okay, iconic, visual. Echoic, echoes, here. Okay. No, stupid. No, I don't want you. Still haven't figured out what the wake up word for that stupid thing is. And then, of course, there's echoic memory, which is hearing. Okay, echo, hearing. And then eidectic, which is, there's no really good way of remembering this other than it's a photographic memory. And some people do have the ability to remember everything, kind of in a photographic sense and remember those things. But that is extremely rare. And it's not necessarily a good thing. Oh my God, that person has eidectic memory. We should worship them as a god. No, we really shouldn't, because they just can remember things a little bit easier. Don't worry about them. Okay. So that's what our sensory memory does. It holds on to memory just long enough for you to pay attention to it so that you can put it into your short-term memory. After that, it's gone and it's not coming back. All right. Your short-term memory, on the other hand, is something that will last for about 5-ish minutes at the most. Your short-term memory, if you put something into your short-term memory and you don't do anything with it, it will eventually fade away and disappear. The other thing that you can do to your short-term memory is you can overload it with too many things. Your short-term memory is only about 7 things big. Okay, it can hold about 7 pieces of information, and then that's about it. After that, your brain just can't remember that. We call this the magical number 7, plus or minus 2. Okay, and the things that we have to remember in order to be able to, survive in the world that we have built, kind of all center around 7 things. For example, without the area code, how big is our phone number?
It's 7 digits.
It's 7 digits. Okay. How many seas did the sailors of old-timey world sail?
The 7 C's.
The 7 seas. How many wonders of the world?
7 wonders?
Yeah. How many dwarves?
7.
It's like they want us to remember all of this, which is why they do it that way. Well, 7 continents, that's not it's just because there are 7 continents. That's just a coincidence. But, okay, the fact that there are so many things that are based around 7 is because we don't remember things after 7 or 8 or 9 or 10. We just don't remember those. If it were the 43 C's, you'd forget most of them. But if it were just the 7 C's, oh yeah, the 7 C's. I remember the 7 C's. Don't worry about that. Okay. So the one challenge is your social security number. How big is that? Plus or minus 2. It's 9. Okay. And typically, social security numbers are one of those things that are a little bit more difficult to remember because it's, 9 items big. Could we have a 35-digit long social security number? Yeah, and it would actually probably be a lot more secure than the ones that we've got because our social security numbers are not very secure. So why did they stop at 9? Because we couldn't remember anything past 9 digits. It just was impossible. People were forgetting them. They said, no, make it 9. So Wednesday, we're going to try. I'm going to see if I can get it to work, but we're going to do a little demonstration on this magical number 7, plus or minus 2. We're going to see what we do remember versus what we forget. That will be on Wednesday, hopefully. We're going to see how that works. Usually we would do it in class, but since we're doing it online like this, I got to try to rework it a little bit and see if it can do this. Now, we can change or we can increase what we can remember by chunking pieces of information together. For example, I remember at the beginning I said, how big is your phone number without the area code? Because with the area code, we go from 7 digits to 10. But how many of you think of that area code as 3 separate digits? Well, you live here. What's the area code? It's 661. You don't think of it as 3 separate numbers. You think of it as the one digit 661. That becomes a chunk. Okay. And we can compress things into chunks to remember them more easily. Now, short-term memory is only useful for about 5 minutes. After that, it will disappear. It will fade over time. Okay. Unless you keep maintaining it in your short-term memory. Now, a long, long time ago, before the age of the smartphone, if you wanted to find the phone number to a person or a business, you had to look it up in something called a phone book. Now, these phone books were huge things that got delivered to your doorstep about once every 4 months. You'd get a new phone book. Okay. And the phone book would have updated all of its information. All of the phone numbers would be new or, the same. Anyway, if you wanted to remember that phone number without writing it down, you had to look at it, and then you'd have to say it back and forth to yourself until you could get over to where the phone was to pick up the phone to dial the phone. 7758708, 7758708, 7758708. And if anybody ever stopped you in the middle of that, hey, how's it going? Oh, it's fine. Dang it! Why? Now I got to look that up all over again. Okay. That is how your short-term memory keeps things in there. It keeps things maintenanced. It rehearses them. Okay. Then, if it gets in there enough, it can move on to your long-term memory. And we'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. Right now, let's give your short-term memory a little bit of a test. I am going to put up onto the screen a series of numbers. They're only going to be up there for a second or two, okay? So it'll be up there and then it'll disappear. I want you to try to remember as many of the numbers as you possibly can. Now, suggestion, use the process of sensory memory to short-term memory to be able to remember as many of the digits as you can, which means you're going to have to take a mental picture of that and be able to reference it. Okay? Don't waste your time or the memory on your phone of taking pictures of the thing. It's not about getting it right. It's about understanding our memories a little bit better. Okay? So just go with it. All right? Each one will be up there for about a second or two. Try to remember all of the digits you can. Okay? We ready? Here we go. Okay. What were the digits? Okay. 2937. Simple. It's going to get more difficult. Here we go. Here's number 2. Ready? Here we go. $7541. Okay. We got this. All right. Here we go. Here's number 3. Ready? Now we're starting to be a little bit doubtful. Okay. We've got to 6 numbers, 821, 374. And not only are we getting some doubt, but we're also starting to see some mistakes. 821, 374. Take a look at the next one. Three, 8, I don't know. Okay. 3820961. Okay. Take a look at the next one. Uh, okay, it's getting a little bit harder and a little bit harder and a little bit harder. Okay, take a look at the next one. Yeah. Especially for those of you who are actually trying to read each of the numbers, you probably didn't even get to the middle of the number before it disappeared. So you have to take that sensory picture and kind of hold in your head and go, is it 9, 9, 2, 8, 1? I don't know. Okay. What about this one? This one's even harder. Well, in this one, and I'll put it up here, it actually can be chunked into 4 separate chunks: 1992, 1993, 1994, and 1995. Now, instead of it being 16 digits long, it's now 4. It's only 4 chunks of information. Now, how does this help you? Well, think about it like this. Now that you know this about your memory, how should you study? Should you study everything in a long study session, nonstop, don't take breaks, you just cram, cram, cram? Or do you do it in small pieces, a little bit over time? And how many things should it be that you study? 7 plus or minus 2. If it's something really complicated or something really new, 5. Stop at 5 and then come back. You can always come back. If you get 20 things that you're supposed to remember, break them into groups of 5 to 7. Your brain will be able to remember it far, far easier. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, why the hell didn't we start the year with this? Why did you wait until second semester to tell us this? Because here's the other thing. Here's the other thing. Memorizing things is kind of useless. It really, really is. I was forced to memorize a whole bunch of things in high school. And I remember things about them, but I don't know what they do. For example, my math classes, no clue what sine, cosine, and tangent do. No clue. I know what they are. Sine is opposite over adjacent, and cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. Now, what does that do? I don't know, but I know that's what it does because I was forced to memorize that. And I memorized it through something called SOHCAHTOA. My geometry teacher, Mr. Oshiro, this little Japanese guy, he explained to us by telling us the story of how he stubbed his toe and his wife told him to soak a toa. SOHCAHTOA. And that's what I remember. It was probably a lot easier because the information was probably broken up into chunks for you so that you could, remember it more easily. And now your classes aren't doing that for you. And now they're expecting you to do that on your own, but not telling you why you should do that until right now. And for that, I'm sorry. But that's why. Okay. College isn't really hard, but you have to do that. Oh, well, that probably also didn't help. Okay. But the fact is that this is how your memory functions. Sensory memory, you're pulling out those diamonds as they flow into the bucket. Okay. into your short-term memory, which can really only hold about 7 things before it gets overloaded and it can't remember things anymore. And then if you process the information over and over again, it can get put into your long-term memory, where it'll be stuck there theoretically forever. Now, why do I keep repeating this over and over and over again? The reason why I'm doing this, and the way that I've done lectures all year long like this, is I say something, and then if it's important, I repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. And I try to tell you a different way to remember it each and every single time. I'm trying to get your brain to process the information again and again and again and again. So when it comes time for the test, you remember it. I also try really, really hard to keep myself limited to 7 things or fewer before I move on to something else, because I don't want to overload your short-term memory. I try to get it into that long-term memory and then move on to something else and talk about something else for a little bit. Now, you might have gotten it on the first try, and good for you. But I know that some people need the 4th, the 5th, the 6th time because they're just not really paying attention, or they're half hearing something, or whatever it happens to be. And I'm trying to ensure everybody's success as much as I possibly can. But eventually I do have to move on, because otherwise we'd still be on, talking about the scientific method, and I would be bored to tears. Okay, so think about that. Think about that as you rework your study habits. Okay, as you rework your study habits, what is the most efficient way for me to study for something? Small chunks for brief amounts of time. 15 minutes, study 7 things. Then stop, take a break, go do something else. Play a game for a little while. Come back, do it again. 7 things, 15 minutes. Study those things. Take a break. Go do something else. Let your brain absorb that information. Okay? Cramming right before a test isn't going to do anything for you. Okay? The other half of the reason why is because of this. We call the primacy and recency effect. Now, when we are given a list of things to remember, we best remember the information at the beginning and at the end of the list, especially if it's a very, very long list. If I gave you a shopping list of, let's say, 50 items, do the other teachers know this? Yes and no. Yes, they know it because that's what made them successful in school. No, because they don't know why they were successful. They just were. And they just figure it happened to them, it'll happen to you. So you should be doing it the same way they did. Duh. It's really, really something you have to think about. And a lot of people don't think. I don't know if you've met some of the other teachers on this campus, but there's a lot of them that just aren't thinking very much, if at all. So yes, they do, but no, they don't. And do they put it into their own practice? Oh, no, because their class is different. Their class is truly interesting, and that's why you should be paying attention more. No, it's not. It's not more interesting. It's actually less interesting, and you don't care about their stupid class in the slightest. You just want to get out of it and just finish the class. Why are you making this more difficult than it needs to be? Anyway. But a lot of this, I'm sure, is just projection on my part. Because was school easy for me? Oh, hell yeah. Yeah. Did I know any of this? Oh, good Lord, no. No, I didn't know any of this. Did I do it naturally? Yeah. I don't know why. I just did. Mostly because I didn't like studying. I don't like studying. Why would I want to study? Sit down and learn something I already learned? What's the point of that? So would I study something and then get distracted by something else? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Drove my parents crazy. They're like, why aren't you studying right now? I just did. You should be studying more. I already have an A in the class. How much more studying do I need? Well, all right, then you got me there. I'll go back to studying after I'm done watching this show. And the one after. Anyway, so the primacy recency effect, again, if I give you a list of 50 things on a shopping list, I say, you're going to go to the grocery store and you're going to pick up these 50 things. And I give you the list, but then I take it away from you right as you leave the door and expect you to have remembered all 50 items on that list. You will most likely only remember the beginning of the list and the very end of the list. Everything else in the middle is going to disappear out of your memory. Okay. And it is the primacy recency effect. Okay. Again, primacy, you remember the beginning, recency, you remember the end. So let's do a test of that. Now, I don't want you to start putting them all into the chat window. I want you to try to remember how many items are on the list by remembering the items on the list. I'm going to give you a little shopping list. It's not 50 items big. Okay. But it will only be up there for a couple of seconds. So it's going to be enough for you to imprint it onto your sensory memory and then picture it in your mind and go, okay, there were this many items. How many items are on the list? And don't just count them up and go, oh, there's 9 or 10 or 12 or whatever. Don't do that. Try to remember it from the items on the list. How many of the items can you legitimately remember? All right. Here we go. All right. How many items do you remember on the list?
All I got was cheese and soap.
Primacy effect is strong. 6. Okay. 4. All right. 9. Interesting. 7 or 6. 5. 4. Okay. There are, in fact, 8 items. 8 items on the list. So 9, I don't know what you're remembering, David. There's only 8 items on there. So you added another thing onto the list, which is fine. I mean, you go to the grocery store, you buy whatever the hell you want. But there was only 8 items on the list. Okay. And what you probably remember is cheese, milk, eggs. Maybe you got to shampoo. But after that, you forgot the bread, the ketchup, the jam, and the flour. Or maybe you remember the jam and the flour and you forgot the rest of it. But you probably remember the beginning of the list and the end of the list, but not the middle of the list. Or maybe you remember the shampoo because you're like, shampoo, the rest of the stuff is food. Why are you buying shampoo at the grocery store? It's cheaper if you go to Target. Or you looked at ketchup and you saw that it was spelled catsup, which is the generic. Okay, catsup is the generic. Ketchup is a brand, okay, owned by Heinz. Okay, Heinz ketchup. Everything else is catsup. Okay. Your brain probably got hooked on that one going, what the hell is catsup? And then you forgot the rest of the list. Okay. But that's what our brains do. They pick out things that it can remember, and then it holds on to those things, forgetting everything else. Again, you're reaching into that bucket of water flowing out of the fire hose, trying to pick out the diamonds as they are falling out. Okay, and put those into your short-term memory. I remember I only got 4 things. All I got is 4. Okay, does that make us bad people? No. It makes us human beings. It's how we work. It's how we function. All right. So once we pull things out of our short-term memory, we put them into, after we've looked at them and thought about them some more, we put them into our long-term memory. And there are different types of long-term memory. And we're going to talk about each one of these individually. We've got semantic memory, episodic memory, declarative memory, and procedural memory. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is semantic memory. And semantic memory is basically all of the trivial knowledge that you know. That's where it gets stored. It gets stored in your semantic memory. Everything that you know about language, the rules of language, so like grammar, the vocabulary, the meanings of the words, all of that stuff gets stored in your semantic memory. Okay, so the words that you know and how to put them together into sentences is a part of your semantic memory. It is also the home to your trivial facts. Okay, this game that is here on the slide is called Trivial Pursuit, and it is a game that I am really good at because I, for some reason, have a semantic memory that remembers every little thing that I have ever been exposed to. And the memory could be completely lost to me, but if you ask me the question, I will be able to pull it out and go, here's the answer. Okay. People don't like playing Trivial Pursuit with me because I will wipe the board with them and feel nothing except my own sense of smug self-satisfaction. Okay. I have versions of Trivial Pursuit here in my closet that I've never opened, that I've had for the better part of 20 years. I've never opened them because no one will play with me because I know the answers. I haven't even opened them. I don't even know what the questions are, but I know the answers and I'll get that answer correct and you won't. One of the last times that I ever played Trivial Pursuit was back in college. So it was about 20 years ago. We went over to somebody's house. We were playing a bunch of different games, and we ended up playing Trivial Pursuit. And I didn't tell them I'm really good at Trivial Pursuit because I like winning, and I wanted to kind of hustle them. Anyway, I remember we were playing Disney Trivial Pursuit, and the Disney version of the game has two sets of questions. One is, for adults, it's questions that adults would know, and then one is for kids. By the end of the game, I was the only one still using the adult questions. Everybody else had switched to the kid questions, and they were still getting them wrong. They're like, how are you supposed to know this? I'm like, how are you supposed to not? I mean, it's ridiculous. But I remember the last question, the question that made it so that I won the game, was about a movie I had never seen. So I have never seen the movie The Rocketeer, but I got the answer correct because I remember the commercial from when I was a kid. And people, and they thought they had me. They're like, oh, you're never going to get this question. Okay. And they read the question and I said, you know what? I've never seen that movie, but I think you're talking about The Rocketeer. Is it The Rocketeer? And they looked at me like, how did you know that? I said, I remember the commercial. Guy from the 1930s flying around with a rocket pack strapped to his back. Yeah, I remember that. How do you remember that? I have literally no idea. But do I remember it? Yeah. Yeah, I'm really good at remembering stuff like that. So don't challenge me to a game of Trivial Pursuit because I will beat you. I will beat you senseless. And I will laugh the entire time I'm doing it. So just remember that. Okay. The thing about semantic memory for most people is that it's not something that's indelibly etched onto our brains. It's something that we remember, and then if we stop using that piece of information, that piece of trivia, it eventually fades away and is forgotten. Okay? You have a particular field of trivia that you know a lot about, and that you could probably, wipe the field with me about because I don't know that. Okay, something, skateboarders or, rap stars. I mean, look at me. Do I look like I do any of those things? No. Do I know much about them? No. But you have that imprinted on your brain for whatever reason, and it's something that you remember. Okay. But that is our semantic memory. It is facts that we know. We know things, and that's how we remember them. We also have episodic memory. Now, this is sometimes also referred to as biographical memory, as it is memories about your life, things that happened to you and how you remember them. In a normal year, I would be telling you, especially the seniors, that you are going to be building a lot of episodic memories in the next calendar year. So between now and January of 2022, you are going to be creating a whole host of episodic memories. For example, you'll remember the day you graduated from high school. You'll remember the senior prom. You'll remember going to college for the very first time, or getting a job, and working that job for the first day. You'll put those into your own episodic memories. It's like a personal diary that you keep locked away inside your brain. And some memories can come back to you, and they will be more memorable than others. For example, talking about graduation brings back my high school graduation, which was now over 20 years ago. Oh my God, that's so long ago. Anyway, I remember my high school graduation extremely vividly. My school district, I grew up in Seattle. Okay, so I ain't from around here. I grew up in Seattle, and so I remember, growing up in the Seattle area and all this kind of stuff. And my high school graduation was supposed to be at a place called the Seattle Arena, which is like a very small venue in downtown Seattle. And the reason why we would have our graduations there and not like out on the football field like you guys do is because it's Seattle. It's going to rain, and what are you going to do? Put everybody in the gym? We don't have the space for that. So they rented out this big arena downtown Seattle so that you could bring more than one person. So anyway, that year, however, somebody said, hey, I need the Seattle Center, which is the Seattle Arena was a part of. We need the entire Seattle Center for some event that we're putting on. And they're like, you can have everything but the arena. The arena's already been booked. And they're like, by who? And they're like, a school district is doing their high school graduation there. And they're like, what if we could get them a different place? And they're like, you welcome to try. Call them up. And so they gave him the phone number. And this guy called the school district and said, look, we need the Seattle Arena. Can we have it? If we can get you another place to graduate from. And the district said, okay, here are our requirements. So good luck. And a few days later, they came back and said, we got you the Kingdome. Can we have the arena now? Now, the Kingdome is where the Seattle Seahawks and the Mariners used to play. So this is a stadium. This isn't an arena. This is a stadium. And that's where I graduated. I graduated in the infield of where the Seattle Mariners played. Okay? It was pretty cool. But that's not the completeness of my episodic memory of this. Now, my high school graduation, the way that it worked was we did one rehearsal, not a week of rehearsals. We did one rehearsal about 15 minutes before they started letting all the parents in. Okay. So we had exactly 15 minutes to figure out, walk in a line and sit down, which we figured out in 15 minutes. It was pretty quick. Seniors, I don't know how they're doing graduation this year, but if it's a normal year, you're going to have a week of having Mrs. Calvert yell and scream at you to line up and walk, and then somebody is going to screw it up because they're not paying attention, and you're going to have to start all over again, and you're going to do that for an entire week, and it's going to really suck. But that's because people are dumb. And what I'm saying to you is, don't be dumb. Okay, just listen to the directions and do what she tells you to do. But I don't know how we're doing graduation this year, so we'll see. Anyway, after we were done with our rehearsal, we had to go and put on our graduation robes and put on that stupid mortarboard hat. And I remember we got lined up and we all were standing in line. We had to line up alphabetically because they wanted us alphabetical that year. And so I was standing next to this girl that I knew from some classes that I'd had with her. Her name was Jenny Mogg. And I remember we're filing in. My seat was in the front row of the second side because, M is right smack dab in the middle of the alphabet. So those days where the teacher decided we're going to mix things up. We're going to put the people with the Z last names at the beginning and the A last names at the end. I was always in the middle, regardless. It really sucked. Anyway, so I'm sitting next to this girl, and people are filing in, and they're walking past her, and about every fifth or sixth person, as they walk past, was doing this. And I'm like, what is going on? And then another couple of people later, I'm like, what the hell is going on? And I looked at Jenny. I said, do you have any idea why people are doing that? And without looking at me, she just kind of tilted her head towards me while still looking forward and said, don't say anything. Okay. But I'm not wearing anything under my robe. What? She's like, you're looking at me. Sorry. Why? I thought it would be funny. I'm like, seems like it would just be itchy. Yes. Okay. But that's an episodic memory that I will never forget, of watching these, creepo weirdo guys walking past her trying to see up her gown, even though it was, floor length. It wasn't like she was, sitting there with her leg wide open. Hey, look at here. It wasn't like that. But I remember that very distinctly. Okay. That's part of my episodic memories. Okay. You have your own episodic memories, things that you remember from your life, important events, big things that happened to you. Okay. Another form of memory that we have in our long-term memory is declarative memory. These are the information, or this is the information that we have to consciously think about and bring forth. We remember what street we live on. We remember that 2, 4, 6, and 8 are even numbers. Okay. We have to think about it, even if it's just a little tiny bit, but we have to think about it and we can remember it very easily. Okay. That's declarative memory. Again, what and that. We also have procedural memory. Procedural memory is a skill that we have learned to the point where we no longer require a conscious recollection of how to do it. And the best example that I always give is how to tie a tie. Almost every year, I get at least one person coming into my classroom with an untied tie going, do you know how to tie a tie? Yes, I know how to tie a tie. Okay, how do you tie a tie? Well, you just tie it. Okay, you tie the tie. Well, I don't know how. I thought you said you knew how to tie a tie. I know how to tie a tie. I just don't know how to explain to you how to tie a tie. You tie the tie. I don't know what else to tell you except you tie it. Give me the tie. And then you tie the tie, and then you take it off, and you put them back on there. And now don't untie that tie. Okay. We gradually lose the ability to describe what we're doing in a procedural memory to the point where we eventually can't tell other people how to do that. Okay. If you've taken a driving lesson from your parents and your parents got really, really mad at you because you didn't do something that you were supposed to, or you did something you weren't supposed to. And then when you said, well, I don't know what I'm doing, you're supposed to tell me these things. And they just go, well, you're supposed to just drive. You just drive. What's the matter with you? I don't know how to drive, Mom. That's another episodic memory from my life of learning how to drive with my mother in the car. I was a good driver. My sister was the terrible driver. Okay. My older sister, she was the one who was god awful. I was the one who was pretty good. Okay. But I remember there was something that I did or didn't do, and she was pissed off because I did or didn't do it. Well, why didn't you do this? You didn't tell me that I had to. Anyway, so I think that's where we're going to end it for today. Because, oh, no, one more. Hold on. One more. Muscle memory. We've talked a little bit about muscle memory. We talked about it back when we were talking about your senses and your inner ear and stuff like that. But basically, muscle memory is another kind of long-term memory that relies on kind of a reflex built in by performing complex motor skills over and over and over again until it just basically becomes part of your reaction. Riding a bicycle, it becomes muscle memory. You don't have to think about it. You just get on and ride. Dancing, typing, hitting a baseball, hitting a free throw, whatever it happens to be. All of those things are examples of how muscle memory can affect us and how we can remember things. All right. So that's where we're going to end up, because that's where we ended up in second period, and that's where I want to end for today.